So I recently saw a post, maybe a while back now, asking why does triple driving feel bad compared to before? And apart from the fact that a lot of new card design nowadays for D is literally just slap +1 drive on your Vanguard, give it multi-attack, call it a day kind of thing, like low effort card design. Back in the day, back in G era, triple drive was considered a good thing, right? People liked triple drive, people like G Guardians, people like Strides. And if you ask anyone, any of the competitive players back then, they'll be going, yeah, those things were good. So why does triple drive feel bad now? So in this video, I'm kind of going to explore that and kind of talk about the essence of Vanguard and triple. I don't know. This is not going to go that deep, dude. So let's kind of break down why triple drive was good. Well, triple drive let you see one more card in your deck, let you trigger one more. It basically made Vanguard a bit more consistent because you saw more cards, and then when you triggered, you have a good chance of like triggering at least one trigger, right? Or triggering multiple triggers. And then because things are slightly more consistent, your opponent who's receiving this attack can now kind of plan more consistently on how they want to guard this move, or maybe just want to take a calculated risk, right? And this is the important part. Things that you can plan against versus things that you cannot plan against or play against. So in recent Vanguard, the easiest example of this is the overtrigger. It's very rare that you can plan against it. When it happens, you lose the game kind of thing. Yeah, that's the most easy way to kind of explain it. Now, the one thing about triple driving is that it also made your defensive plays a bit more interesting, right? One to pass on a triple drive, you probably not want to do that. There's a good chance you'll be broken. A 3 to pass on a triple drive, that's pretty safe, right? That's pretty safe. A 2 to pass, it's a bit risky, but if you pull it off, you saved yourself some cards. And then when your opponent triggers that trigger on their first drive check, both players are clenching their butts going, ooh. Either I hope a trigger is coming or I hope a trigger is not coming, right? So it added stages to defensive plays that were open to you. Back then in Twin Drive, it was just like 1 to pass, 2 to pass, or PG, right? And even on a 2 to pass, 2 to passing was generally the correct way, but if your opponent decided to go all in, hey, there's nothing you can do. So it added, I guess, like a layer of safety because you have the 2 to pass and a 3 to pass. So there is that, right? There is that. But there is a change to current Vanguard compared to before. And I mean, I mentioned this already in the video. It's the overtrigger, right? But also front triggers. Front triggers are a big addition to why I feel like the triple drive has become less good. Now, you might be wondering, Kai, you are wrong. Because front triggers came out in V. And it wasn't bad in V, right? That was the case. That's true. Front triggers did come out in V, but there was no good reason why you would want to run front triggers, unless your deck was specifically built around front triggers, right? Like you had a mechanic that relied on front triggers. Back in V, you had things called draw sentinels or draw PGs or crit sentinels, right? Or crit PGs, like anything like that. Basically, you could run a trigger lineup that required 0 fronts. 0 fronts. You could run 12 crits, you could run 8 crits with 4 draws. Those are probably the most common like lineups when it came to trigger ratios, right? But in D, you are forced to run only a maximum of 8 criticals, and then you'll have to choose usually between either fronts or draws and one OT. So it'll be 3 draws or 3 fronts. But nowadays, because power creep has gone so much, everyone is running fronts. If your deck is running draws, it feels kind of bad. So every deck is at least running probably 3 fronts in their deck. Now let me ask you a question, and this should be a pretty easy question to answer if you kind of follow this video and know where I'm going with this. What is one of the most impactful moves you can do in Vanguard to swing a game? That would be to break guards. If your opponent committed cards to guard and then you still got your damage through, it's like getting the result and forcing your opponent to pay for it. That is, and the more cards they commit to that guard, and then you breaking it, the more advantage you're getting. Like if you break a 1 to pass, sometimes it happens, right? People just put things there, like the intercept for 1, and you're like, okay, I'll just trigger. If I get it, I get it. If I don't, I don't. But then when they commit more cards, 2 to passes, 3 to passes, the swing on those becomes way more crazy. way more powerful, right? Way more backbreaking for the person who committed the guard. So let's kind of go back to, you know, fronts and how they interact with this. If you ever trigger a front on basically a drive check, it's a free trigger. It's literally the free. You don't have to have any player input on where it goes. You just get a trigger for free, right? A tutor pass, trigger a front. Now it's a one spot. So you don't have to go, do I put this trigger to the side or put on my Vanguard? You don't need to think about it. You just get it, right? And that is the fundamental difference between old Vanguard and new Vanguard. Old Vanguard, you didn't have fronts. Every single trigger you checked, you have to put it somewhere. You have to consciously decide where you need to put it. Are you going to go all in? Are you going to go not all in? Kind of thing, right? So if your opponent 2 to pass you or 3 to pass you, you'll be going, to count my triggers and all that and see where it goes. And then make my decision there. But now, if you trigger a front, you don't even need to count your triggers. I get it. And now I got a free trigger. And I just need, like, X minus 1 more triggers to break you. So I like to call this a scenario where you just don't need any player input to, like, you know, break, right? And, you know, apart from that, there's also the OT, where if you trigger it anytime, you will just break all the shields, right? You'll break all the shields unless they PG. I think losing defensive stability is a very big reason why triple driving is not as good as it was before. Losing that layer where, you know, a triple drive is usually, a 3 to pass is usually very safe. Now you can lose to an OT, or then, like, you know, 2 fronts and then a trigger like that. But then the 2 to pass being like a huge drop in defensive stability as well, I feel like is also a huge loss, because now anytime you 2 to pass a triple drive and they trigger a front again, I've mentioned this scenario a lot of times, and it definitely would have happened to you. It's a feels bad, right? So we can use maths to kind of figure out how much worse it is now. So I used ChatGPT. You can use anything else. You can use non-AI, but for, like, math calculations, ChatGPT, well, AI is usually good enough, right? Except maybe Grok. I don't know. At Grok, are you ever wrong? No, I'm not wrong. Anyway, so I used ChatGPT, and you can just kind of type in the scenarios. It understands Vanguard to some extent, but you can also just kind of define, you know, what a triple drive is, and all. Just make sure they know what they're talking about. For what I did was that I mentioned the scenarios where I wanted to happen, and we can see the percentages. So the scenarios would be things like all 3 triggers coming up, or like 1 front and then 2 triggers, or 1 front and then 1 trigger, or then, like, no front trigger but any trigger, then plus 1 front, then plus any trigger kind of thing. All those scenarios kind of work for what we're talking about, because they're all scenarios where a front comes out and then a trigger comes out, and then you don't have to think about it, right? And then the last one is just like the OT appears somewhere, and then, you know, you just don't have to think, right? You just don't have to think. So with this, I also made different scenarios. So the first scenario that we're going to see here, this first one is like you have a 35 card deck, because that's usually around nowadays where, like, if you go second, for example, that's where you end up. You end up at around a 35 card deck because you draw each turn, you drive check each turn, you take like 1 or 2 damage, your ride line gets you cards out of it. So it's always around that 35 mark, maybe 36, 37, or like even lower if you're like Bavsagra. Or you got like energy cyclers, for example, kind of thing. So I think 35 is a pretty good count and deck. And this is happening just before your drive check as well, which will be a triple drive. And then for the first scenario, let's say you high rolled. No triggers have been removed from your deck. So you have 16 triggers in a 35 card deck. What is the chances you'll hit the kind of auto win scenario where you don't have to think about anything? It's actually like 17.25%, which is actually relatively high, right? Relatively high, but that's like a really high roll scenario. And then, you know, you have other things like, let's say, you only have 11 to 12 triggers left because you naturally kind of drew some triggers. Then it kind of drops a bit, but like we're keeping the fronts and the OTs there. So the percentage drops a bit. It becomes like, you know, around 15%, and then 14.5. So the chance of this is like bad time scenario happening is actually still relatively high, right? And then if you also like remove 1 front, so I did that as well. So, you know, 2 fronts and OT still in deck. Then it drops to around like 12.5 to 13%. So still, it's around that 12 to 13% mark, where, you know, your first triple drive check at 35 cards in deck will result in you triggering a combination that will break your opponent's shield, right? It'll just break your opponent's shield. So that's like a pretty high count of like a decent chance of happening, right? I mean, the scenario itself is a 2 to pass at that specific timing, but think about 2 to passes at different times. Like later on, maybe you're 2 to passing a triple drive. You know, maybe the ratios are a bit different, but still, there's like a 10 to 15% chance that you'll just break your opponent's shield, and that's not counting for the fact that, you know, if the OT is still in the deck and you have the like you're doing a triple drive. After 30 cards in deck, there's like a 10% chance of you just auto-winning the game. You're just breaking any kind of shield by triggering that OT. Long story short, hard guarding has become worse than before. Of course, with the addition of the over-trigger, that has always been the case. But even now, with the more heavy use of front triggers and the fact that we're introducing triple drive into the format, it has made a bunch of unintended, you know, consequences. Especially when the timings when you're forced to 2 to pass a triple drive are usually at those specific times when, you know, you're early game or you're just road to grade 3, and you can't commit those 3 to passes or the PGs down yet. You have to take that risk, and when you do, not a lot of times, but sometimes, enough times, you're getting punished for that. So how do you actually fix this? Well, it's not going to be easy. First off, the easy fix will be just getting rid of over triggers. I mean, everyone's been saying it. Because having like a 1 in 10 chance, 1 in 10 games, you just automatically lose because an OT was offensively triggered and broke all your shield, is like an automatic feels bad, right? But I mean, like, you know, defensive OTs and all that, yeah, it's pretty backbreaking. But what about fronts? Like fronts, I mean, the reason why this is coming up so much nowadays is because fronts is played a lot more, right? Simply because of the power creep. Maybe draws just need to get better, right? Maybe draws should just get more defensive power. Things like give players a choice on choosing things other than fronts would be a start. And maybe, I don't know, like, I don't think getting rid of fronts is the correct choice, but like forcing people out of these situations would be the better choice. I mean, making it more easier to 3 to pass would be a start too, because the reason why you have to 2 to pass is because you're like forced to do it, right? If you have more defensive ways against like a triple drive, for example, or a +1 drive kind of thing, maybe it's better that way. Maybe it's better that way. I don't know. That would require way more thinking. And as you can see, I use AI to think for me, because AI is never wrong. Hell yeah. But I don't know. In the comments, maybe say, what do you feel about front triggers? Do you actually like front triggers? I think Vanguard's always had this issue where like you had crits and heals, and what do? Draws are cool, but then you had stands. Were stands cool enough? They had to print broken stands for stands to be played, but then you have fronts, and fronts are only played now because they have extra defense, right? So maybe the answer is something else. I don't know. Let me know in the comments what you think, right? Do you like triple drives now? And I'll see you in the next video. All right, this is just a thought video from me once in a while. All right, bye.